4 college students murdered in the middle of the night. 2 roommates asleep downstairs who didn't know anything was happening. No forced entry, no witnesses, and a killer who just walked out the door just as quietly as he walked in. Today, I'm walking you through this story like we're just sitting down and talking about it, calmly, clearly, and without any of the hype this case got online. Because trust me, the real timeline is way more interesting than the theories. So if you were anywhere near the internet in 2022, you remember this case. It absolutely took over TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, all of it. People were creating insane theories, reading lips and videos, accusing random students of murder. The whole thing kind of just spiraled out. But here, we're not going to do that. We're just going to stick to what happened, why it happened, and how investigators solved one of the most complex digital trails that it's ever been left. Before we get into the timeline, I want to introduce you to the 4 students whose lives were taken. I want to say this with respect. These weren't just names on a news graphic. These were completely normal, vibrant people with entire futures ahead of them, who were just normal college students just like myself and many others. So you had Kaylee Gonsalves. If I mispronounced that, I'm extremely sorry. She was 21 years old, outgoing, smart, and she was about to move to Texas for a tech job. Her best friend, Madison Mogan, lived there with her as well. You had Zana Kernodle, who was 20 years old, who lived there with her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, who was also 20 years old. They were regular college kids doing regular college things. Studying, hanging out, going out on weekends, the stuff that we all did. Let's talk about the house, the famous King Road house. If you've ever seen pictures of it, you know it looks kind of confusing, like someone built 3 different houses and stacked them on top of each other. It has 3 floors, multiple entrances, a weird floor plan that barely makes any sense, and each floor is basically its own space. So on the first floor, there were the 2 roommates who survived. On the second floor, you had Zana and Ethan. And on the third floor, you had Kaylee and Maddie. So now that we know the victims, the house, the layout of the house, and why it matters, what happens next is a timeline that looks completely normal until it isn't. All right, let's walk through the night of November 12th, the night that this all happened. So Kaylee and Maddie go out to a local bar. They grab food from a late night food truck after the bar, which is completely normal. And honestly, if you're in college, you've lived this exact Saturday night. Zana and Ethan, they're at a frat party and they come home around the same time that Kaylee and Maddie come home. Now, by 1:45 a.m., everyone's back in the house. The lights are off. People settle in. Nothing weird's going on. Everyone's just getting home and going to bed at around 1:45 in the morning. And then there's this one small window of time that changes everything. Between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., a man enters the house. There was no forced entry, no loud noises waking up the neighbors, no one woke up downstairs, and no one heard anything. The man goes upstairs, and in that time frame, between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., the 4 students, Kaylee, Madison, Zana, and Ethan, were attacked while they were sleeping or just waking up. At the scene, a knife sheath is left behind, which is a small detail, but it becomes the entire backbone of this case later. After these events happen, the killer leaves quietly and no one sees him. Kind of. Now, this is really important because the surviving roommates became a massive target online. One of them, identified as DM in court documents, later told investigators she actually did wake up during the night. She reported hearing what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog, then hearing crying from Zana's room, and then hearing a male voice say something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." At one point, she opens her bedroom door and sees a figure in black clothing and a mask, only the eyebrows and eyes visible. walking past her toward the sliding doors. She freezes. He walks past her and out of the house. She goes back into her room and locks the door. People online were like, why didn't you call 911 right then? But trauma responses are weird. Most of us have heard of fight or flight. There's also freeze. A lot of experts pointed to that. She was terrified, disoriented, and didn't fully understand what she had just seen. And remember, she still isn't thinking quadruple homicide. She's thinking something's wrong. There's a stranger in the house. I need to stay in my room. Again, this is the middle of the night in a college house where people go in and out all the time. So fast forward to the late morning around noon, the surviving roommates and some friends start realizing that something is seriously wrong. Someone looks in a room, sees something they can't process, and 911 is finally called, officially for an unconscious person. When police arrive, they don't find someone passed out. They find 4 students brutally murdered, and what started as a confusing situation inside the house instantly turns into one of the highest profile homicide investigations in the country. So at this point, here's what we have. 4 victims, a house with no forced entry, a terrified surviving roommate who saw a masked man, no weapon, and no suspect. The town is about to go into full panic mode, and the internet is about to do what it always does. Fill every gap with information with whatever sounds the most dramatic. Meanwhile, the real investigators start doing something very different, quietly building a case that will eventually lead them straight to one person. As soon as the news breaks, 4 students murdered, killer unknown, Moscow, Idaho flips. This is a small, quiet college town. Stuff like this doesn't happen here. Then the case hits social media, and it gets messy. Everyone becomes a detective. People are dissecting the food truck video frame by frame, accusing the guy who was serving the food, blaming neighbors, blaming exes, and blaming random students that just happened to be on camera somewhere near the victims during the night, and even in the past 2 or 3 weeks as well. Full-length TikToks and YouTube videos are popping off, calling people suspects with basically no evidence. It gets to the point where police have to publicly say, stop harassing innocent people, you're making this worse. Meanwhile, the police are doing this instead. While all that is happening online, investigators are focusing on 3 big pillars in the investigation. The first was the cameras in cars, the second was the phone data, and the third was the DNA. The first big break in the case was when they had caught a white Honda Elantra on camera multiple times throughout the past couple of weeks leading up to the murders and during the night of the murders. Security cameras around the neighborhood caught the car between 3:29 and 4:20 a.m. the night of the murders, and it was seen speeding away from the area right after the estimated time of the killings. The police put out a be on the lookout for that kind of car, and eventually that search led them to Washington State University, just across the state line, to a criminology PhD student named Bryan Kohberger. Now, the second pillar was the phone pings before and after the murders. When investigators looked at historical cell site data, they found Kohberger's phone had pinged near the King Roadhouse at least 12 times in the months before the murders, starting back in August. Not once, not twice, but 12 times. Most of these pings happen late at night or very early in the morning, times you wouldn't just accidentally drive past the same random student house. Then, the night of the murders, his phone goes dark. Between about 2:47 and 4:48 a.m., there are 0 signals from his phone. It's off, in airplane mode or otherwise not connecting to the network. Right over the window when the murders happen. Just after the killings, the phone pops back up on the network south of Moscow, like it's on the move away from the crime scene. One more extra creepy detail, a few hours later, around 9 to 9:30 a.m., his phone pings back in the area of the house again, like he drove back by the scene the morning after. Why? We don't know for sure. Curiosity, checking if the police were there yet, thinking about going back for something he left. I don't know. Whatever the reason, it's a terrible look, and investigators definitely noticed. The third pillar was the DNA on the knife sheath they had found. At the crime scene, investigators recovered a tan Kabar knife sheath next to one of the victims' bodies. On the button snap, they found a male DNA profile. They didn't know whose DNA it was yet, but once they had Kohberger on the radar from the car and the phone data, they got a search warrant to collect DNA from his family trash in Pennsylvania. And when they tested it, it was a perfect match to the sheath, consistent with him, being at the crime scene. So now they have his car in the area, his phone repeatedly near the victim's home before the murders, going dark during the murders, and then returning after the murders. And they have his DNA on the sheath left in the bed. At that point, the case isn't built on vibes or speculation, it's built on math, biology, and timestamps. Now, while the investigation is heating up, Kohberger and his dad are actually driving from Washington State back to Pennsylvania for winter break. On the way in Indiana, something interesting happens. They get pulled over twice in this same day. Both times are for pretty minor reasons, like following too closely, that kind of thing, but the officers let him go. Later reporting suggested the FBI had actually asked state police to make those stops so that they could get a clear body cam footage of Kohberger's hands and overall appearance while the case was still being built. So while he was driving cross country thinking he might be getting away with something, there are already multiple agencies watching him. So by late December, investigators have a white Honda Elantra they can tie him to, phone records showing a pattern of passing by the house over and over, a suspicious gap during the murders, his phone returning to the scene later that morning, and a DNA match on the knife sheath. Now the question isn't who did this, it's when do we move in and arrest him? And when they do, a lot of disturbing context about who he is and what he was studying starts to surface. On December 30th, 2022, SWAT officers rolled up to a house in Pennsylvania, Kohberger's parents' home, and arrest him in the early morning hours. He doesn't confess, he doesn't explain, he just asks if anyone else has been arrested. He's extradited back to Idaho to face charges. Once his name goes public, people look him up and the story gets even stronger. Kohberger isn't some random drifter, he's a criminology PhD student at Washington State University just across the state line. His entire academic life is centered around criminal psychology, crime scenes, how offenders operate, and how investigations work. One of his classes and assignments involve analyzing crimes and law enforcement responses in detail, and how evidence is processed and how investigations unfold. Now, to be clear, criminologists will tell you we do not teach people how to commit crimes, we teach why they happen and how to solve them. But the irony is hard to ignore in this scenario. You've got someone learning about investigative methods while allegedly planning a crime of his own. And then the internet finds something else. Months before the murders, a Reddit account believed to be his posted a survey titled "Research Participation Needed." It asked people who had committed crimes to describe their thoughts and feelings while committing the crime, what they were thinking before committing the crime, how they felt after, how they left the scene, and how they chose their victims. Basically, a psychological deep dive into what it feels like to commit a criminal act. And again, on its own, as a research project, that's not suspicious. Lots of criminology students do similar surveys. But when you look at that in hindsight, alongside the murders and the evidence, it hits very differently. After the killings, investigators say Kohberger went back to teaching and going to class just like normal. He cleaned his car, allegedly top to bottom, including late at night. He changed his license plates on his Hyundai shortly after the crime. He even, according to some accounts, wore gloves to grocery stores while shopping. On paper, he looked like a grad student grinding up the semester, but in reality, police were quietly tightening the net. And over time, with the evidence stacked against him, Kohberger entered a plea arrangement that took the death penalty off the table. In 2025, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for burglary. He still has never publicly given a clear motive. And that's the part everyone wants to know, right? Why? Right now, there's no single confirmed motive. We don't have a confession explaining his thinking. We don't have a diary entry or a manifesto that he wrote. But what we do have is a pattern of behavior. A man who appears to have been watching that house, studying crime and criminals, and then allegedly acting out something he thought he could get away with. Sometimes in true crime, the most unsettling answer is there's no satisfying why. Just opportunity, obsession, and complete lack of empathy. The King Roadhouse was eventually demolished. Some families supported the decision, seeing it as a way to move forward, while others worried that taking the house down would erase an important physical reminder of what happened and potentially evidentiary value. The University of Idaho created memorials and a healing garden for Kaylee, Maddie, Zana, and Ethan. The town of Moscow had to adjust from being this quiet, low-crime college town to the place where one of the most high-profile campus murders in recent history occurred. So that's the story of the Idaho 4 murders, told without the noise, the guesswork, or the internet drama. Just 4 students living their lives, a house that turned into a crime scene, a community that panicked, and an investigation that used cameras, phone data, and one tiny piece of DNA to track down a suspect who genuinely seemed to believe he could outsmart the system. If you're still here, thanks for hanging out with me for the full breakdown. Let me know in the comments what part of the case you enjoyed the most. Was it the part where the surviving roommate had seen the figure? Was it the Reddit survey? Was it finding the digital trail? Or something else? Let me know down in the comments below. If there's any other case you want me to cover on the Cold Report, please drop it in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one.